Uh, yes,
Yeah,
sir. It is started.
yes. Thank you. Thank you, Shiv. Okay, so yesterday we talked about only homogeneous goods, where farms which operate in the industry, they produce and sell the same commodity, homogeneous. So there is no difference between buying from farm A and farm B, right? Today we'll uh, delve into a more interesting part and more real life examples where we'll be delving into what we call heterogeneous commodity. Okay, so you can think of an industry which has fairly large number of farms. Okay, we can think of say pharmaceutical companies, banks, electronic goods, print media, television media. You can think of all these things where in a particular industry there exists a large number of farms, right? Now, what we have learned from the theories, couple of theories that we have learned yesterday, that they will earn zero profit. Because remember, price equal to marginal cost in a perfectly competitive environment. So long run, it's a zero profit condition. Now, we have not done competitive selection, but look, it is only a variant of profit competition. So if you want to learn, you can learn it by yourself. There is nothing new. Okay. Now, when it comes to the other option like barter and oligopoly, this we will do today. I have deliberately not done the duopoly oligopolistic models yesterday in a homogeneous setting because repeating the same thing for the heterogeneous setting makes no difference, right? So we'll be covering it. Now, if take for example, even without looking into the theory or the mathematical model or the structural functional forms, you can just in clear, simple intuition you can think about it. If you're selling same or very similar goods, you cannot charge very different price. So basically, you'll be earning either zero or near zero profit. Now, what is a long run? What is a short run? In economics, we do talk about 3 to 4 periods of time. The first is a very short run. Now, remember, when we talk about the price of a good or a commodity, quantity supplied of a good, the equilibrium and whatnot, in our mind, it is implicit that there exists at least a production process and hence a production function. What is a production function? It's a function that maps a set of inputs into either one or set of outputs, right? Very simple. Now, uh, when you think about a farm, it can change its inputs. Remember when we talked about returns to scale yesterday, when we start defined returns to scale, I said, suppose you have a vector x of x1 to say xn inputs, and you increase everything by lambda. Now, you cannot, in practice, change the inputs all of a sudden. So, if the very short run means where the inputs are not exactly possible to be changed overnight. So, take for example, uh, mm, those at least some of you or most of you have stayed here in IIT Kharagpur campus for some time and must have seen that particularly during some festival, the prices of certain food items, including vegetables and fruits, they shoot up overnight and they again fall back. Why? Because there is an increase in demand overnight. But you cannot change the inputs to your production and hence output does not change. So what happens in a very simple demand supply framework, if you just, okay, it's slide 39. So let's go to one. First, this picture. So overnight, this demand curve shifts upward. Take, for example, somewhere here, somewhere like this. But the supply does not change. What will happen? The price was here, but now the price will be somewhere here. Overnight, the prices will shoot, right? And hence, what you do is basically in a very short run, the inputs are fixed. Short run, medium run, some inputs are fixed, some inputs are variable. So take, for example, you have certain capital equipment in your production process and certain labor components in your production process. You can hire labor over a period of time. You can hire some skilled labor also over a period of time. You can impart skill to a set of unskilled labor that you have and convert them, right? So you can tinker with certain set of inputs, but you might not be able to change immediately the land in which you are operating. That will take some time. So these will constitute the short and the medium run. While the long run means where everything is flexible. So you can do anything. All the inputs can be changed. So that's the definition of this run. When we talk about long run, short run, it has something to do with the practical implementability of changing of inputs so that my output can be changed. Or suppose you have a new technology that has come up for which you need to have more uh, say computing machines, computers, or other automated machines, which will replace some unskilled labor. And we're seeing the prevalence of industrial robots, including, say, I heard that Bank of Japan, in one of their branches, most probably in uh, Kyoto city, have implemented a humanoid in the reception. Okay, so these are common things happening in today's world. So theory suggests that in the long run, you will adjust the inputs in such a way, you'll go for your cost minimization function. Cost minimization means the profit maximization. Look, it's just two sides of the same coin. Profit will be maximized, or the cost will be minimized, right? So that's the same thing. Now, and this is what we call the duality problem in economics. So fine. Now, what we see in evidence? In evidence, what we see that most of the industries they produce a large number of similar but not identical products, right? Take for example the automobile industry. There was a time when I was of your age, so I'm assuming it's 18, 22, that age group, when when there was only a few cars on Indian roads, and every model you can see from a distance. So which model is that? Now, when I drive from Kharagpur to Kolkata, 50% of these makes and models are unknown to me. Too many, all very similar, but not identical, right? If you look at pharmaceutical, you overeat all the time. We tend to overeat a lot of times, and you want to have, uh, you tend to have some indigestion, and you want to ask the pharmacist, give me a medicine for indigestion. He will give me so many prazole group drugs, pantoprazole, omeprazole, whatever prazole. So these are like me too drugs, the generic drugs. All are identical in their function, but not the same, right? And consumers, they purchase only a subset of the available product variety. And in certain cases, 2 to 5 big farms are there in an industry, at least. So these are the observations. So our existing theory, whatever theories that we have studied, pricing mechanism, behavior of the farms, the way they operate, those predictions does not exactly match with the observation. So what's wrong with that theory? Problem is nothing wrong about that theory. Problem is, so far we have dealt only with homogeneous goods. On the contrary, these are industries where the output is consists of what we call differentiated products. So basic logic is human beings have different tastes and preferences. And to cater to them, you should have different varieties. And with different varieties, you can actually can become a price maker your own, at least in one variety. So you behave as a monopolist in a very niche variety. So that is the type of differentiation. Now, differentiation, product differentiation, can be basically modeled in three ways. And types are two. The first type we'll call the horizontal differentiation. So basically, you can think of Coke and Pepsi. So no one can rank them. Only might have a different preference. I might like Coke, you might like Pepsi. So different people will have different brand loyalty. And these will model in what we call location or address model. Or in a non-address monopolistic competition, Chamberlainian model, of which I do not know how much we'll be able to cover up today. But I will try at least to give you some hint about how to go about this. Second type of differentiation is vertical. Now, everyone can rank the varieties unanimously. So take for example, you can think that MacBook Pro is better than any other laptop available. So you can rank the quality and buy the one which suits your budget. Or the idea is if I can have different qualities and suppose I charge the same price across all the qualities, I will buy the best one because all the prices are same. And hence, very intuitively you can see that if you can have different qualities, you can have different prices. And now, so far we have talked about from the supply side of it. What about the consumers? What about us? It is we who demand, and hence these things are produced. If there is no demand for something, what's the reason or what's the rationale of producing that end good? Right? So basically, the non-address models are like where people consume a variety of products. So there is no strict brand loyalty per se. I would to love to have more varieties in my t-shirt wardrobes, right? I will not always wear a blue t-shirt. I might like to have a red t-shirt, a white, a black, a blue, whatever. Different types. So this is what we call a love for variety approach. And in certain cases, we can model the demand function in a very different way. It is called a characteristic approach. The characteristic approach is something which was devised by one economist called Lancaster. And he said a particular product is not a product, but it's a bundle of characteristics. Take, for example, the laptop that you use has different characteristics. Its RAM, its uh, memory space, its processing speed, touchscreen facility available or not, the screen size, and whatever. You can keep on adding to the characteristics. And when you go to the market, you have an ideal mix of characteristics in your mind. And if your budget permits, you will buy the brand which caters to all the characteristics that you have in mind. But if your budget does not permit, you settle down for the second best alternative. So look, the modeling itself is contingent upon how you model human behavior. So before going into it, let's have a look. Look, I have just tweaked the inverse demand function in a very simple way. Two forms only and two differentiated products. So good one and good two. So these are close substitutes of each other. You can have a Assam tea and a Darjeeling tea. You can have Coke or you can have Pepsi. Something of that sort you can think of. You can have a Samsung mobile phone or you can have just give an iPhone sort of. Now the question is, look at the inverse demand function itself. The intercept term I have kept same. But for the pricing mechanism for each variety, I'm just making it a little bigger. What happened? Okay. So for pricing of the first variety is not only contingent upon the quantity of that variety, but also quantity of the second variety. What does that mean? Basically, if the price of Assam tea goes up for some reason, people will shift to Darjeeling tea. Or say tea and coffee. Very classic example. If price of tea goes up, people will switch to coffee. So the pricing of one variety or one commodity has direct bearing on that of the others. And this is what we call the cross price elasticity. So look, P1 is equal to alpha minus beta Q1. It's a classic inverse demand function, just capturing the law of demand. But the gamma, because the other varieties production or availability in the market also has a bearing on the pricing of this variety. Look what we have said. Beta is greater than zero, obviously. Because I have a negative sign and beta should be positive because I am assuming the good is a normal good for which the law of demand holds. On the other hand, gamma can be positive, can be negative. Why? The good can be a substitute as we are assuming. It can well be a complement, right? So if the price, suppose you always make your coffee with sugar. If price of coffee goes down, you'll buy not only more of coffee, but also a little bit more sugar because you want to have more coffee. As simple as that. Only thing that I assume, irrespective of the sign of a gamma, and that is why I'm taking the square, beta square greater than gamma square, which means the own price elasticity dominates the cross price elasticity. Right? Now there are certain measurements. So let's forget about this slide. There is a particular measure in terms of this. Just look at this type of inverse demand function. You have beta and gamma. And then you can always say, create a variable called delta, which is gamma square by beta square. This measures the degree of differentiation of the goods. So if the goods are very, very differentiated, let's talk about iPhone and Redmi phones. Let's talk about Maruti cars and Audi cars. Highly differentiated. I understand both are smartphones or both are automobiles, but they belong to different categories altogether. Which means the change in one brand's price has negligible or no bearing, absolutely no bearing on the demand of the other. So these are basically detached market, almost detached market. So basically then gamma is basically tending to zero. If gamma tends to zero, what will happen to delta? Delta will tend to zero. And the two commodities we are talking about are highly differentiated. On the other hand, if they're very, very homogeneous, brew coffee, Nescafe. So if brew coffee price shoot up, people will automatically switch a lot to Nescafe because the price of each of these varieties will affect each other significantly. So technically, what I can say, mathematically, gamma square tends to beta square, tends to, not equal. Because what I said will still keep this, that beta square is more than gamma square. So gamma square tends to beta square, equal to is as like a limiting condition. So hence, delta can at max tend to 1. And look, you can have the different zones of differentiation like this. Gamma positive. What was gamma's sign? Negative, right? So gamma, value of gamma positive means we're talking about substitutes. Value of gamma negative means we're talking about complements. 0 means the two goods does not have cross price impact. And beta is always positive. So you can have delta equal to 1 here, delta equal to 1 here, right? The gamma square more than beta square. These are ruled out, these two zones, because we have assumed beta square more than gamma square. Own price impact is more than other brands' price impact. And these are the directions in which you have the degree of homogeneity or the degree of differentiation. It's very simple. Now we'll add one more. This is what we call strategic interaction. And I just want all of you to just tell me very simply, have you ever heard of a particular thing called game theory? Have you ever been exposed to game? Because some economic students, I'm sure they have been. What about other departments? I simply have very little idea about the game theory components in other courses. Anyone, have you heard of something called a prisoner dilemma game? Because that's the granddaddy of all games. So please raise hand if you have no idea about what we call game theory. Zero idea about game theory. Please raise hand. No hands raised, which means I assume all of you must have some idea of game theory and the concept of, say, Nash equilibrium. May not be Nash equilibrium, but some idea about the thing of game theory or strategic interaction, if I say in a very different language. Anyway, if you even do not have any idea, the book which I have referred to yesterday in the Teams page, there is a chapter in the beginning which gives you very simple introduction to certain concepts of game theory. Okay. Look, as from this sort of demand functions, what I can understand that my decision is going to affect your decision. It's not unilateral anymore. In a monopoly, it was only one person. So it was not contingent upon anyone else. In perfect competition, I thought that my decision is not going to affect anyone else's decision. That's the idea of price taking behavior or behaving competitively. So in either case, there was nothing what we call strategic interaction. But here I can understand, very simple, that the moment I take a decision on Q1, not only that will affect P1, but it will also affect P2 through gamma, right? So my decision is contingent upon your decision, and your decision is contingent upon my decision. I know that you know that I know. Not only that, you know that I know that you know. And this is what we call the layers of rationality. And they can keep on going. And this is in a game theory parlance, we'll call it something of a common knowledge. That what is common knowledge? Who are the two players here? Farm 1 and Farm 2. Both can see the inverse demand functions P1 and P2 functions and the relationships between beta, gamma, and everything. So everything is visible to everything. Okay. So that's what we call common. Now, from this common knowledge, what I can understand that my decision is going to affect your decision. Now, how to solve it? Very simple. You simply maximize your profit. So look, I'm the ith farm. So my profit is what is given by pi I. My choice variable is qi. But I know pi I is dependent on both qi and qj. I not qj. Simple. And from the first order condition, what you get is something of that sort. So you rearrange it. So alpha minus twice beta qi minus gamma qj equal to 0. You rearrange it, you get qi as a function of qj. And this is what we call the best response function. So given any value of qj, you know exactly what will be your qi, right? Similarly, you will have qi, qj as a function of qi. And where these two functions intersect, the two reaction functions intersect, you have equilibrium. Because that is exactly where my best response matches your best response. And we are dealing with rational people. No irrationality so far. No uncertainty so far. We can plug in uncertainty here by just adding a probability function. Okay. So you have two best response functions. And from here, let's also have a revisit to that degree of differentiation. So if gamma square tends to beta square, so I'll just replace this. This is not gamma tends to beta. Yeah, let's keep gamma tends to beta. Let's talk about substitutes. Gamma is positive. If gamma tends to beta, so the products are homogeneous. And look what will happen. The slopes will become steeper. On the contrary, if gamma tends to 0, the second part gets almost tending to 0. So my reaction function, which is my best response, does not depend on it. So they are very, very differentiated products. My decision does not affect your decision. And look, we have the same interpretation of gamma, the same interpretation of the relationship between gamma and beta, or the own price elasticity and the cross price elasticity, right? Now, when you have these two best response functions, you have two unknowns, Q1 and Q2. You have, so basically what is this? R1, Q2 is what? That is Q1 is equal to this, the right hand side, this one. So put Q1 here and Q2 here. You get the first equation. Put Q2 here, Q1 here. You get the second equation, right? So you have two equations, two unknowns, solve, and you get what we call the Cournot equilibrium. So you have quantity, price, and the profit of both the participating firms. Now look what happens to profit. If gamma increases, gamma can be the least value of gamma can be 0, or the max value of gamma can be beta, right? Now, as the value of gamma increases, what is happening? Products are becoming less. This is not least. Yes, sorry for the typo. Less differentiated. And then your profit falls. On the contrary, this value of pi I which is the profit of ith firm, will increase with lower and lower values of gamma. So what is my takeaway? My takeaway is larger differentiation leads to higher profit. So the more I can differentiate my product from your product, the larger profit I can have. Because two-way, one, more differentiated the good is, more differentiated prices can. Both can charge high price. And more differentiated means the cells will not be also not be affected. Quantity will also not be affected. My quantity is not going to affect your quantity. Now, this is what we call a Cournot game. After the economist, Cournot came up with this solution without knowing about game theory. Maybe in 1800 somewhere, 1868 or 1870 during that time. And this is the first application of game theory in economics without knowing game theory during that time. What you could understand is a strategic interaction between two firms selling. Now look, you can have two different, you can apply this even with homogeneous group, where basically what will happen, will have face not two different inverse demand functions, but one inverse demand function with beta Q1 plus Q2. The more quantity I supply, more market share I have. And that is why I skipped that homogeneous part of Kuhn, because you can always boil down to the homogeneous part from the heterogeneous part. Now, second way of competing with each other is price. So you have from these inverse demand functions, you can always write direct demand functions. So you can rearrange the first equation in terms of Q1 as a function of P1, and in the second equation, Q2 as a function of P2, right? And you can have two equations like this. So these are direct demand functions. And here you can compare the two functions and you can find out that the values of A, B, C are nothing but in terms of alpha and beta. Okay. So this I leave to you. This is a very simple, tedious algebra, which everyone can. So there is no problem. Now, when you do this, and what I'm saying, now let's compete in price rather than quantity. Let's set the price. Let's use price as a choice variable. So look, the functions looks very, very simple. So I'm not getting deeper. It's only that in the Cournot game, and this is what we call a Bartrand game. This was developed by an economist called Bartrand, and that was by Cournot, French economist. Now, in the Bartrand game, your maximization problem is contingent upon your choice variable Pi. And you know your price is going to directly affect other price. Simple. You get two reaction functions like that. Here, Pi as a function of Pj. And similarly, you can have two best response functions, and you will have equilibrium, prices, quantities, and profits, which you can solve for. No, I'm not going into the solution part because the moment you just everything is there, if you just do the maths, you get it. So there is nothing. And had there been a blackboard sort of a thing or classroom lecture, I could have derived it. That would have been better. There is no meaning of explaining this equation. From first order condition, how to get to the equilibrium does not make any sense. All of you can do because you have two equations. P1 is a function of P1 is equal to A plus C P2 by 2B and P2 is equal to A plus C P1 by 2B. Solve for P1 and P2, you get this. Plug that back into your quantity functions because the values of P1 and P2 known, you get Q1 and Q2. And plug that back to your profit function, you get your profit values. Very simple. There is nothing. Only thing that I want to show you or I want to emphasize upon is the reaction function in a quantity game are negatively slope, while that in a price game are positively slope. Why? Look, everyone, whether you are competing in price or you are competing in quantity, you are either determining quantity and price gets endogenously determined, or you fight in price and quantity gets endogenously determined. Both are basically the choice variables in some sense. But if I raise price, you can raise price. If I charge a samosa 6 rupees, you can have a little bit differentiated samosa. You can charge maybe 7 rupees, not more than that, or 8 rupees. The moment I increase the price of my samosa by say 20 rupees, you can charge at 25 rupees without clientele getting lost. So when I talk about my choice variable price, my reaction functions are positively sloped because the choices are positively correlated. Or in technical term, we call them strategic complements. On the other hand, if I raise quantity, it is best for you to reduce your quantity. Why? Because if both of us increase quantity, there will be excess supply, prices will come down, profits will fall. So the moment I increase my quantity, it's best for you to reduce your quantity. And these are what we call strategic substitutes. Okay, so that's a nomenclature of it. Now, again, if you look into this place, look into the profit functions and everything, you'll find you get the same relationship that higher differentiation leads to higher profit. However, profit under cooler competitions are higher than under bargain competition. Why? The logic is very simple. Logic is the moment you set a price, I already know that it will not be wise for me to charge a price very, very higher than yours, depending on the degree of differentiation. And hence, if I charge a very high price initially, there is always a possibility that you'll undercut me. You'll charge a lower price and take away my clientele, take away my consumer customers. And that forces me to keep prices low. And hence, prices under Kurno are higher than prices under Bartrand. Bartrand is the price competition, Kurno is the quantity competition. More differentiated products, larger will be the difference between the two prices. And though we always talk about price mechanism, the underlying behavior of firms show the other way. They basically try to capture the market from the quantity perspective rather than the price perspective. Either way, you are going to set a price for which uh, my decision is going to be affected by your decision. And this is exactly the domain of what we call strategic interaction. And as I can say, this is nothing but uh, an application of very, very simple game theory. Okay. Now, so far, what we have done that our decisions are being taken simultaneously. Whether we choose the two quantities P1 and Q2 or two prices P1 or P2, our decisions are taken simultaneously. What if I take a decision after observing what you have done? So the firms, whether they compete on price or quantity, you take a decision after observing what I have done. And this is what we call a sequential game. So now, the first mover is called the leader, he chooses a price in the first stage. Now the price once chosen, it's irreversible. And observing that, the second far chooses a price in the next period, right? And the approach of solving it is very simple. It's called the backward induction. So you solve for the last period, roll back to the last but one, again one period back till the first period is reached. In a multi-stage game, you solve for the last stage first and then crawl back to the first stage. And the process is what we call backward induction. And the solution mechanism is called subgame perfect equilibrium or subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Okay. Now, forget the jargons. Let's see how we solve for it. So as usual, I put some numbers and give you a direct example. So we start with two direct demand functions with certain numbers. Now, look at the number. If here the value attached to P2 is 1, that to P1 is -2. So if I raise my price, you lose my quantity that I can sell will be impacted by -200%. On the other hand, if you raise your price, some customers will come to me and hence it's positively related. That's why coefficient of P2 is +1. But 1 is less than 2, so my cross price elasticity is less than my own price elasticity, right? So I give certain numbers and very simple numbers. Now you solve for it. So you go for the first order condition. So you'll have P1 as a function of P2 and P2 as a function of P1. The two first order conditions. Solve what you will get these values. B stands for Bertrand, okay? The superscript B. Now, what to do? These are the static part, right? Which we have already done. What about the sequential part? Sequential part is farm1 takes farm2's best response function as given and then chooses P1, right? So my profit is based on P1 and P2. But what is P2? P2 in itself is a reaction function which is depicted by P2 as a function of P1. So I take the static best response functions and then plug it back to my optimization problem. So look, what is Pi1? Price into quantity because I have not used any cost. Let's assume the costs are 0 for the time being. You can always add the cost that will come in your optimization function, but at the same time, it will not be contingent until and unless prices are converted to cost. So that's a very different type of a story. We're not going into that complicated. So I'm keeping it absolutely simple. I have two demand functions, and hence I can have two reaction functions. And my profit is P into Q, which is nothing but revenue. And I'm just solving for that. So 168 minus twice P1 plus P2. So 168 minus twice P1 plus P2 I replaced by the reaction function. What was the reaction function if you remember? P2 is A plus CP1 by twice B. You put the values of A, B, C here. From the numerical values, we'll get 168 plus P1 plus 4. So if you solve for these two direct demand functions solve for the reaction functions, we'll get P2 is equal to 168 plus P1 by 4. And hence, I replace P2 in my reaction function, in my profit function, in my optimization function. Now look, everything is in terms of P1. And P1 is the price which I will set. So my choice variable to optimize. What you get? P1 is equal to 60. You do the same thing. So maximize pi2 as a function of P2 and R1 of P2. Choice variable P2. Solve for that, you get P2 is equal to 57. Now look, the second firm has chosen a price a little less and selling a quantity a little more, such that, look, second firm's profit is larger than the first firm's profit. So not all the time the first mover will have an advantage. It's a classic example of second mover advantage. Okay. And you can see S stands for Stackelberg or sequential. Both the profits are higher in a sequential mode, but that of the follower is higher than that of the leader. Okay. Now I'm not going into, I will update the slides. These things are not exactly relevant. I'll just keep these slides for your um, perusal for some time if you want to have a look why this is happening. The other thing that I want to cover, so please give me 5 minutes extra over. So I'll require another 15 minutes to give you this idea. Uh, it's called what we call address model. So basically, I always identify myself with a particular brand or a location. And the more far away I am from my brand, my chosen brand, my chosen characteristic, I am more so. So closer I am to my specific brand is analogous to closer to that physical location I'm choosing. So you can actually think that two particular goods, they're exactly same thing, but sold at different location. So it's a 0 to L continuum. At every point, there is a consumer. So a particular consumer X means that consumer is located at a distance X from the origin Z. Number of consumers N is equal to, because at every point there is one. So at every unit distance, there is one consumer. Total length of the road is L. So I'll say it is N is equal to N. So at every point, there is one. The idea is 0 might be a particular 0 to L is a continuum. Every point depicts a particular brand. You identify yourself at X, which is your most preferred point, or where you yourself is located. Now, let's bring in two farms. Where will they locate themselves? Which means now two farms or two producers will come and compete with each other in choosing the location. How will they locate themselves? Again, profit maximization problem, but from a very different perspective. So suppose farm A is located at A, so its distance from the origin is smaller. The distance between farm A and U located at X bar is X bar minus A, because 0 to X bar minus A, so X bar minus A, the distance. Similarly, there's a farm B who is located at a distance small b from the L side. So from this end. So the distance from the origin is capital L minus B. And hence the distance between farm B and farm at the point where you have chosen, you have identified yourself, is L minus B in spot. That's how we do. Now, we bring in a completely different type of reference function. My utility is something, but basically I'm just measuring the T's utility. Whenever I pay a price for something, I'm shelling out some money. And which means it's a utility to me. So what I will do, I will choose that particular point as a farm, which minimizes the disutility of consumers. And I'm just saying it's a unit transport cost is T, which means You are at X bar, this is your preferred position. But if you are sold a particular commodity located at A, you are unhappy by the amount by which you have to travel from X bar to A. So unit the distance between A to X bar, which is X bar minus A, unit cost T. Look, that is how I'm getting these two utility functions. Now let's assume we choose this X bar such that given the locations of farm A and B, X bar is located at a position where X bar is indifferent from buying from A or B. So his disutility from A, purchasing from A, is exactly equal to the disutility it gets from purchasing from B. So formally, you'll have the two utilities just coming from this, right? Put X bar here. Instead of mod, you exactly know, keep A to the left, keep B to the right. When I'm just taking A and B, you can always interchange them. Will not make any generic difference. So X bar minus A is positive, but uh, B, L minus B is greater than X bar. And hence, you remove the mod functions, you come to the absolute terms, and you exactly know how to make that person indifferent. So if I buy from A, this is my disutility. Buy from B, this is my disutility. And if I'm indifferent, that means this should hold, right? And there you will get the value of X bar. So anyone to the right of X bar will definitely buy from B. Anyone on the left of X bar will definitely buy from it. Look, it is very similar to median voter theorem. Okay. So now, how do I measure? So X bar, till X bar, everyone buys from it. And anyone to the uh, right of X bar will purchase from B. And that gives, and I'm assuming that everyone buys one unit. If everyone, you do not buy two smartphones, three smartphones. You buy one smartphone. So everyone buys one unit. So the number of people who will buy from you gives your demand curve for farming. A number of consumers will buy from B is given by L minus X bar. And now you assume barter and competition and price competition. So these many people, third bracket, is the number of people purchasing from A to charge a price pre-A. First order condition, you get PA as a function of PB. Similarly from farm B. So you have two reaction functions, solve them, you get two different prices. And the equilibrium market shares and the profits. Because once you solve for PA and PB, you can solve for the profit plugging here. Simple. Right? Now, the question is, what will be the location? Where should A and B locate themselves? I can choose PA and PB, depending contingent that I have already located myself at A and B. Now I can choose price. But the question is, can I choose the location also simultaneously? The problem is no, I cannot. Look, the reason is very simple. If A tries to move towards X bar, more people will buy from farming. Similarly, B will also try to move towards this direction. B will try to move from right to left to capture more market share. A will try to move from left to right to capture more market share. But what is the maximum they can go? Where A and B becomes coincided. They'll locate themselves exactly at the same position. Now, the moment they locate themselves at the same position, there is no difference between them. The output or the produce becomes completely homogeneous. And we have said that these goods are same except for the location. Now, if location is different, you can charge different prices, make positive profits. Higher the distance you have between you two, right? More differentiated you are, more profits you can make. On the other hand, you have a tendency to come towards each other to capture more market share. The moment you coincide with each other, you will become the same commodity. And then you have become a homogeneous. Now, under a homogeneous setup, what will you have? Both will try to undercut each other till price become equals to marginal cost of perfect competition. So zero long run profit. So the equilibrium does not exist there. So you choose A, which is your location, and B, your location. And dependent, once you have fixed location, you can choose the price. You cannot choose location and price at the same time. You can, but unfortunately, because of time constraints, I cannot go on. There are models, what we call circular city model. So far, the city that you have considered is a linear. The moment you make it a circle, like 24 hours, different airlines uh, taking off and landing at different hours of the day. So you can treat that as a locational circle. You can treat the clock as a circle. So you choose the time, that means you choose the location. And that is why you find flights between the metros like Delhi, Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, Bangalore, around the clock. And the prices are quite different at different times of the day. So you can choose your location and price at the same time. For that, we have to go for a circular approach. But unfortunately, due to time constraints, I cannot delve deeper into that part. But if we located in a linear type of a stretch, which means our preferences are linear, fine. I know 0 to L, you can make it 0 to 1 also. It does not make any difference at all. You can choose, look, all these numbers. For only one case, I've given certain specific numbers. Otherwise, it's simple abstract X and Y and A and B. That solves your problem. Okay, so it's already 3 minutes past 6. I have taken 3 minutes more. I should stop here. And I ask in all of you, if you have any observation or anything, please go ahead. I will send the slides today. And if you do not get hold of the reference, it is available online. You know where to search. If I cannot exactly mention due to copyrights issues. Hence, I will mention the chapters. So chapters 4 and 5 are fully covered yesterday. And this is part of chapter 7 and portions of chapter 7 of the same book. If you do not get hold of, please let me know. I'll somehow try to share the uh, reference itself. Slides I'll definitely share today. So that's from my side. And now I simply ask or request all of you to give your observations, or if you have any doubt or any questions or anything that crops your mind. Okay. So I don't think you have any particular observation as of now. So if you have any queries, you can always mail me. Have a look on the slides and the reference. And if you still have some doubts, you are always free to drop a mail. So I'll request Shanton to stop the recording. I think it is over for today.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Shan. So I'm leaving.